Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chris Haggerty, and we're going to call our November 8th meeting of the Facilities Committee to order. Today on our agenda, we'll review the minutes. We'll begin our discussion of sustainability as a topic in our building and operations. We'll have our section to discuss, introduce any new business. We'll get our 3-month forecast, and then we will adjourn. Just as a reminder, we do have our public hearing tonight on the reassignment plan, if you all are sticking around for that. So at this point, if you've had time since it was put into assembly, an opportunity to review our minutes from September the 20th, I'll entertain any motion.
So move to approve the minutes.
There's a motion from Mr. Hershey.
Second.
Second from Dr. Ring. All in favor of approving the September minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. At this point, then, we will launch into our discussion of school sustainability practices in Wake County Public Schools. As you know, we've been talking about this for some time, and I just want to set the stage that we're not going to cover everything today. This is just the first of what will hopefully be many structured conversations. But this will be an important meeting because hopefully what we'll be able to do is really kind of set our path. Look at some definitions and see how we'll approach this discussion in a positive way where we can move forward and look at how we'll actually make progress in this area. So with that, I will turn it over to Dave Burnett. We've got other people on the slides, but Dave, I assume you're driving.
I am.
All right, take it away.
Elizabeth and Alice are in Charlotte at a conference. It's the EdSpace conference. And they helped put this, the majority of this together. My job is to not mess it up. Okay. So definitions you mentioned, obviously this is what we're going to be talking about, definitions, opportunities, some current practices, some examples, and then the sustainability values workshop, which we're excited to talk about. And so definitions, definitions, just a couple are noted here. There are many different definitions, and sustainability means something different to most everybody. If you talk to like an electrical engineer, or really most of the public is going to be thinking sustainability, and they might be talking about solar photovoltaic panels. That might be what that means to them. Mechanical engineer, it might mean geothermal. The list goes on. I would add that the county is very interested, has a strong interest in solar panels. So they have been working and successful in many of their many installations, and so they are encouraging us to be doing the same. The reality is that sustainability is all of the above definitions, and we've got some topics here and many more topics. This slide is just showing a few for consideration. And these are some examples of current sustainable practices that we follow in our new construction and renovation projects. It's from an FD&C perspective. Additionally, Life Cycle is doing many other projects as far as like LED lighting. They often do that with HVAC conversions. I've talked with Tony Champion really probably this summer, and he had mentioned that they do about 3 or 4 large projects a year where it's HVAC and LED. From the examples there, some of those are project requirements, but as far as the clean air and resource conservation, those are definitely have more opportunity to be added, not specifically project requirements. But as this is a discussion, perhaps we can talk about pros and cons some of the items. In this case, like, we do list EV charging stations under clean air. 2 towns currently require Wake County Public Schools to install EV charging stations on our school campuses. And that, we understand that that makes sense, especially for commercial developments. In this particular case, we would caution that there's some challenges associated with public EV charging stations, on school grounds. If you think about it from a security perspective, generally schools don't want the public accessing the school for non-school reasons, and that in this case, if the public was accessing our property, for the charging station, they may be there for 30 to 60 minutes. You might have others waiting, and it could cause a security issue. What we could do, because some of those charging stations are programmable, the thought would be, okay, we'll just make it after school hours. Well, a lot of our schools during the course of a day really don't close down. So again, that's a conflict that we would rather avoid in that particular case. And so then the thought is, okay, well, let it be for internal use, high school students or teachers. Well, we won't be letting students or teachers, leave class to change, to move their car. So again, that's a disruption, that we, again, would really want to think through and see if we couldn't come up with an alternative that we would be talking with the towns to do something that we think might be more beneficial, that still fits with their desires to be as environmentally sensitive as possible. But that's just one example where maybe one size doesn't fit all, and that I think we would propose that, hey, maybe we can fill in the blank scope of work. Let's say we add PV photovoltaic chargers instead of a charging station. Again, that would be something we would hope to be able to negotiate with the town. These are examples of school-based sustainable practices. These went through and were submitted through the facility needs portal, just to help with some definitions on this. You'll see solar array under clean air. Typically, that's demonstration panels, demonstration arrays. Those are about 5 kW systems. Solar panels, they're actually on the building, and those 2 schools actually have, one of those schools has a solar thermal panel, which is hot water, which don't see too many of those, but they're still effective. So this is the values workshop slide that I mentioned. So at the October 17th Board of Education meeting, the board approved the contract for replacing the FD&C's design guidelines that we do for new projects. Included in that scope of work is this values workshop. So the values workshop is a joint sustainability visioning workshop to help guide the Wake County Public Schools on our sustainability goals. So one of many, but one of the uses for the information gathered will be to develop a sustainability section of the new ed specs, and then some of that pertinent information will be distributed throughout the ed specs to the specific sections, really to be a little bit more user-friendly for the design consultants. We do hope that we will have some facility committee member participation in this sustainability visioning workshop. So the next steps, we've already started with the Solar Ready designs on projects, and we are bidding the upcoming Brentwood, Lockhart, North Garner Middle School with solar array bid alternates. So it'll be designed, it'll be a separate breakout price. If we have the funding for it, then hopefully and it's a good value, we would be expecting to recommend approval, and that then we'd have that part of the project installed. Also, not shown, but we're designing future kitchens to be all electric rather than having fossil fuels. Lastly, the last bullet on that was the dedicated sustainability staff. Again, sustainability is a huge subject with many, many opportunities. Existing staff are stretched thin. We have close to half the number of staff that FD&C had in around the 2007 timeframe. So to give this proper attention, FD&C would be wanting to pursue additional staffing as a sustainability coordinator, sustainability department. Depends on how big and how far-reaching the effort is and how much the district decides it wants to do at one time. So that's that.
I'd like to add a few things.
Thanks.
So we have struggled some with this broader question of sustainability. We've reached out to a lot of our partners. We do a lot of sustainable things now. As you can see in the slide deck, we're already doing a lot of things, many of which are code-driven that we already do in terms of design of buildings and plantings and resource conservation. So in that regard, I think we are ahead of the game in many, many areas because we are doing a lot of those things. Recently, we heard a presentation yesterday, the Wake County, and we went through that presentation and things that they are proposing to do. We are already doing many of those things. So we're doing a lot of good, great stuff right now. I guess where we are is we need to assess where it is we want and need to go from this point forward. We also, and that's part of the visioning process, we also believe that if we are going to do this, we have to decide, is it an FD&C effort or is it a district effort? Either way, we're going to need some type of staff support to move the needle on this. We just don't have the manpower available with the personnel we have and the number of projects that we have to really do the due diligence on this that we really should. So again, we're doing a lot of things, doing a lot of great stuff. As I have shared with some of you in other meetings, it seems as if when people think about sustainable practices, in some of the conversations I've had, they really focus on solar. I've heard that a lot. Solar is a big component of that. But there are other things. You know, we have schools that dabble in recycling. You know, we could look to lessen what we send to the landfill. Of course, there are costs for some of those things that we do, and we have to be mindful of all that. And so, as we have this value process going to be in place, we wanted to share this information with you all and get feedback from you on some direction you all might want us to pursue, and maybe some of your ideas that we can incorporate into the work that needs to be done.
Thank you, Mark. So I appreciate you bringing this information and setting the stage for us here. What I'd like to do is, we have a lot of time on our agenda dedicated to this topic, and that's intentional. Because while the presentation wasn't very long, I think there's a lot to discuss. And for those of you who are more new to the board, this is an issue that we've talked about to some degree for several years. And I've made my opinions on it known for 5 years. And we run into some similar barriers and obstacles, and of course all the other competing needs that we have as a school district. But what I'm hoping today is that rather than as a board, us getting into a position where we're getting down into that managerial administrative role and trying to tell schools, you know, you need to separate your garbage this way, or you need to have this wattage bulb at this way. I'm hoping that what we can do is really try to provide more of that board level direction and visioning and really help lay out a path and a direction we would like our district to go in. And if we can do that, then staff can use their expertise to figure out the best way for us to proceed. But I think right now, as you've heard, there's been a lot of stop and start. I think there's been a lot of, well, we do a little bit over here, we do a little bit over here. We've heard about solar. Well, does this just mean we need to put solar panels on all of our buildings? Or what does this mean? And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to start by offering what I think is a framework and then opening it up for the rest of you all on the committee to sort of see what you think, what you would add, what you don't like, and then maybe then ask staff what's appropriate in terms of directions where we could go from there. So with that, as we've talked about, Sam and I, as chair and vice chair, we work with Dave and Mark and Glenn and everyone in our planning committees, and so we've had a lot of discussions about what exactly to bring for discussion. And one of the reasons you saw on the slide there, this issue about definition, is because definitions are important. If we hear from the county that they want more sustainability in our building plans, well, what they mean is specifically they just want to see more solar. Well, that means one thing, but sustainability can mean so much more beyond that. It's important to have a definition. If that definition is environmental conservation, if that definition is stewardship of natural resources, if that's waste reduction in terms of wasted dollars, wasted energy, there's a lot of different places we could go. And so as a model, what I would encourage all of you to look at is something we've been through fairly recently, which was our development of our equity policy. And for the equity policy, one of the things that was very thoroughly debated, and it actually took some time to develop, was what is the definition of equity? Because just like sustainability, equity can mean a lot of different things to different people. And so we wanted to make sure we had one common shared definition of sustainability. So I'd ask all of you to think about that. What do you think should go into a definition of sustainability? Now, the second thing, sustainability, after years of pushing this, is now something that's incorporated into our strategic plan. And rather than reinvent the wheel, I thought if we go back and we look at the plan and how the plan talks about this, that could give us a good launching point. We have as one of our aims of the strategic plan, talking about our operational efficiency pillar, that Wake County Public Schools will establish new systematic processes and guidelines balancing operational efficiency, fiscal responsibility, and environmental sustainability. So we have it right there in the strategic plan, a good way to have these discussions. Like Mark had said, and Dave had mentioned talking about the EV stations, any policy change, anything we do specifically can have pros and cons. There's some things which might seem like a good idea, but there might be a drawback. One of the things we have in our lunchrooms now is that we often don't have dishwashers. And so on one hand, we hear, well, if we had dishwashers, we could reuse the trays, and we wouldn't generate as much waste for the landfill. But on the other hand, we would be using electricity, we would be using water. So there's a trade-off, and we would have to decide for what we're looking at, is it more valuable to conserve the water and the fuel, or is it more value to prevent the solid waste, the solid waste we're generating? And kind of where is that balance and what's that trade-off? And so looking at operational efficiency, fiscal responsibility, and environmental sustainability, I think that sort of sets up how, as a district, we can look to operationalize sustainability throughout the district. I know that if we're going to operationalize it, we'll need metrics and things to look at. And so some things to consider, and I'd love your feedback on this. Energy consumption is an obvious one. What can we do to reduce energy consumption? Energy efficiency is not only going to reduce our fossil fuel reliance, it's also going to save us in operational costs. And that's more money we can use elsewhere in the school system. Same thing with water use. And, what can we do to reduce our water consumption? Waste reduction. How much do we spend every year in waste reduction? Can that be mitigated somehow? Through different recycling programs, composting programs. There's several pilot projects at a number of our schools already that we can look at and evaluate. So those three right there are three specific areas related to sustainability that also can be tracked, and then where we can see a direct cost benefit and measure, is the investment, here's the investment, here's the offset, and see where we can have improvements to the district. We can look beyond this if you want. If you want to be more, take a broader definition, we can look at air quality and the air quality in our schools and things that we do that impact air quality. We can look at even things like biodiversity and stormwater runoff and how our fiscal sites, our actual schools, impact the land around it. We can go as broad or as narrow as you want, but I wanted to throw out some things that we could consider and that could be part of that sustainability definition. So much like we did with the equity plan and the equity policy, if we can come up with a sustainability definition, if we can identify metrics, then at some point in our process of following our strategic plan, we should probably conduct a sustainability assessment. Now that we know what it is we want to measure, let's see what kind of job we're doing. Where's the room for improvement? Where's the low-hanging fruit that we can address immediately? What things are going to require more systematic changes and maybe greater planning and investment? After we have the assessment, then we can set SMART targets for how we improve systematically over time, and then we operationalize the plan. And so, operationalizing the plan would be something that would justify having staff in a sustainability role to ensure this. But even before we get that staff, we have both in our fiscal and finance department, people who can track these expenses. We have people in our facilities and operations department who understand the consumption, the costs that go into a lot of these designs. We have people even in our data and accountability department that if we need to survey and do more work among the staff or among the parents or the rest of the family, the students, the other people in our community, our teachers and staff, we can collect data that way. So it's science, but it's not rocket science. I think if the board wants to go in this direction, then some of the steps to consider are how we'll develop a definition of sustainability and whether or not we need to put that into a policy. Having staff come back and help us identify metrics for what is it based on our definition that we can measure so that we can see how we are doing, as we set goals and then work to attain those goals. Conduct the assessment and then begin to plan out. It may not, it might be something that's more involved in future strategic plans, but that we have planned out how we're going to operationalize meeting these goals and these targets. It sounds like the county, our principal partner in a lot of our facilities and operational planning, they have an emphasis on solar. But even though if their emphasis on solar, I think all of this work would be important to them. It might require going to them and asking for a commitment. Are they willing to finance the sustainability work? It might cost more up front, But as Dr. Taylor has told us before, as we go out and we have these conversations, we have to be able to show return on investment. And if we can show the return on investment, yes, it might be a higher cost per square foot to make some of these improvements, but if over the lifespan of a building, we're able to save so many dollars, either directly in fuel and water costs, indirectly in terms of waste we're diverting from the landfill, or however it is, I think we can have a good plan going forward. So we had 5 years to say my piece, but I got it all out there. And so I'll put that out there and then turn it over for any comments, discussion, or ideas everyone else has. Is there any
Good question.
feedback? Yes, sir, Mr. Hershey.
Who are our community partners? Because you list them when you say, county partners. Who's that?
County partners?
Well, in the values workshop, it said district leaders, board members, county partners, and I don't know if that includes the public. That's what I'm
So
trying to get at.
I think it's once a quarter, it's the Wake Energy Commission, and we participate in that. It's a call-in thing where people share out information. It's essentially the county, us, and the community college system, and other interested people. I don't know if they have any regulatory authority, but it's a good information sharing tool for us to participate in. We also, when we say community, also think of the larger community of schools, meaning not just Wake County. Dave and I both have contacts at other places that we rely on to share information and glean ideas of things that we can do better. But that community is really all of us here in Wake County.
Okay. So there's an opportunity for the public for, I think it's a Wake Green partnership. How does the public get involved in this?
From our viewpoint, they really haven't been. I mean, this is, at least since I've been here, and I don't know what happened before, but this is the first really conversation of substance we really had about this. So I don't know the level of detail that the county allows public input or participation. I'm not sure how they handle that.
Because I know we have teachers that are active, have a lot of interest in sustainability, environmental education, and I know they're part of the values workshop, but there are, so this group, is it Wake Green Partnership? Wake Green Schools
The Green
Partnership?
Schools Partnership.
Yeah. They're a group that has professors at NC State that participate, and so I think they worked on the native plant list recently for Wake County and submitted information. They're just an example, because there's others out there. And as we are doing roundtables, it's how do we, because we have to get the buy-in for all of these things, from my perspective, from the community, especially if we go to the county and we say, we would like you to support these initiatives. So I just would like that to be factored in. The only question I have right now is, where do you think we are behind in sustainability? Because you would know better than I would.
Go ahead. We may have different ideas.
That's great. That's great.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's kind of the point. And as we go through the values workshop, those kinds of things get hashed out. So we need to go through that process. But certainly, the county has the goal of carbon neutral by 2050. So that's, and that by itself means many things. So to focus on carbon, which is really what I think a lot of the we'll say industry is starting to look at it and focus more on. That's something I think that is a little bit easier, for us to do. Certainly, like I mentioned, okay, we're already going to start with electrifying our future kitchens, natural gas. So going back and trying to do retrofits, We're looking to see what that cost is going to be on an average, cost, and then, that's probably something that can be worked into the CIP. Trying to reduce and eliminate, our use of fossil fuels, I would think is, where we are. We haven't pursued that. It hasn't been a discussion topic, but I think that's where we need to go on that. Wake County is growing, 56 people a day. So with that, that's additional pressures on the electrical grid and electrical capacity. So we have to reduce our electrical consumption. And that may not be sounding like it's dealing with carbon, but it is trying to make room for some of these 56 people, that are coming every day. So I think everyone is going to have to be reducing their electrical consumption. And we have a lot of opportunity to do that. But that's in addition to working on that, you have to make the commitment from a maintenance standpoint to have them funded and staffed so that they can support it. Right now, their priority is opening school and keeping schools open. And you're not going to get there. They won't be able to maintain additional systems. That's putting additional pressure on them. That's the wrong direction to go. So you have to deal with that. You have to deal with that now because you're already suffering from it, from electrical consumption standpoint. I've got more, but I'll stop right there.
That raises a question, though, for me, for the maintenance, too, is when we're buying equipment for these schools, if we spent more on a piece of equipment, would it last longer and reduce maintenance, or you get to a certain level, like an HVAC unit, where there's 5 different options, and if you spend $10,000 more, it's not really going to give you extra time and reduced maintenance. So I would be curious about that as far as keeping stuff out of landfills, but also sustainability and making sure we're not piling on maintenance.
So certainly as the consulting engineers, as we are either doing replacements or we're doing like life cycle, or we're doing new schools and new projects, we of course look at that, and we look at the life cycle cost of those products and try to get really the most efficient system with the least amount of maintenance requirements on it.
Great. Some of the things that we could and should do, we just need to be careful about what roads we go down. Mr. Hagan, what you described, we would be very thorough on the front end in defining and capturing information and looking at metrics. I know that in the past we have tried some sustainable things in the district and they just didn't work out. There's still some remnants of those scattered throughout the county. And so I think we need to be mindful of not doing that again. And we really need to be solid and thoughtful about whatever efforts we move forward with. I agree a lot with Dave. I think the emphasis is on reducing our carbon footprint. And the county's doing that as well. That's their big thing, to be carbon neutral. I don't know why we wouldn't follow, although we operate in a different environment than they do. We've got 198 facilities plus, and so we deal with things on a daily basis that not only do they not deal with, but even if they do, maybe not to the magnitude that we deal with. So, and you mentioned water and sending things to the landfill. I was surprised when we got here that we didn't really do dishwashers and kitchens, and that was a result of, I don't remember when it was, but during the water crisis, and so we switched over to not being as water intensive, but we put more stuff in the landfill. And so we've got to have a clear definition of where we want to go and where we want to end up. And we appreciate the conversation. I know it hasn't happened since I've been here. I don't know what kind of conversations you all have had in years past about really defining this and determining what direction we go in. So this is much appreciated by us.
So, Mr. Haggard, what I would say is, I think all of this is the right conversation to have, that we certainly got to determine what is our understanding of the definition, what is sustainability. I also know that because the county commissioners have an expectation, and when we develop a definition, I think we certainly got to make sure that it's going to address some of what they're looking for, because that's going to come with that funding piece. But ultimately, one of those things that we have to look at when we talk about this is, there's a sustainability that saves us money. We look at electricity consumption, water consumption. I know we've got the data on that, but then there's the idea of sustainability that saves the environment. And so we can certainly marry those two things together. But I think you're absolutely right. We need to look at it from our strategic plan, what our definition is, and knowing that whatever choice we make, you're going to end up having trade-offs. And so, we may have those trade-offs now. 30 years from now, when we're all retired, then there may be a different set of trade-offs that they have to make. But I agree that there's a million directions we can go in terms of sustainability. But I agree that we tied back to our strategic plan. We developed those metrics. And then at the end, we have that conversation with the commissioners to say, this is your goal for everybody. And how does that fit within our definition? And so that's where the real work is.
Patrick?
Yeah, this is a very good conversation. I think, the definition of sustainability, if we are going to be working with some of these partners, maybe we need to have that discussion with those partners as well, right? To understand that we're talking the same language, have the same definition, and if it's, somewhat different, maybe that we are only taking a chunk of that definition of sustainability that people are trying to strive towards. We can't do everything within our limited resources, right? So is it possible for us to take a chunk of that goal to try to help the overall goal of all the partners? And I agree with Dr. Taylor. We got kind of have to balance the cost of doing this versus and the rewards that we can gain out of it, and even looking at sustainability in terms of long-term costs. It may look good now, and we may have the wherewithal to pay for these these ideas. But are there any consequence in the future, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years down the road that we still need to pay for? Solar, I know people have different ideas of solar and what the cost impact is over 20, 30 years, I know people that in Europe that they had to replace their solar panels. And how does that impact? Who's going to pay for that? And and I just want to make sure that we weigh all those future costs as well. And then also looking at the environmental impact of replacing those things 20, 30 years down the road. So a lot of things to think about. But I think it's worthwhile to have these discussions.
Ms. Caulfield, do you have any thoughts?
I just have a couple of questions, I guess, that maybe might provoke some conversation. I don't know. There's a couple of things throughout there. The presentation, the EV stations, for example, and I heard what you said about some of the difficulties and challenges and questions we'd have to ask ourselves. Is it really reasonable for students, for the amount of need, I guess, is what I'm asking? Like, do we have a lot of students that even have these cars? I mean, they're not cheap, right, to buy a car. So for them to have it, for staff to have it, to have a need that we would have to have that kind of station, I feel like would we, on to what Dr. Wing said, are we spending more money to have it, just to say we have it, versus the need for it?
Right.
Do we have any research on that?
We don't, no research on that, and that's in response to a couple towns that are requiring that of new projects that we do. So it's a, town requirements, and they're looking at, all the developers, that are coming in, so really all commercial development. So I think their perspective, and they're the best ones to answer, but their perspective is they're trying to set up that network for the future. That's one of the concerns and one of the, issues that's kind of holding back EVs, is that the network of the electric charging stations isn't quite out there, that people are confident, with it. So I think their purpose in this is to try to help, what they can, reduce that concern.
Right. So we really don't know that that would be something that would
As far as
not
how
wind
many
up costing
students
us more
have.
money in maintenance versus what we,
So we don't help anyone who's driving a gas engine,
Right.
with fuel up at our school. It's just not an expectation. So you could kind of ask, why is it an expectation for EV? But again, the public component of it is where we, have a, the
so
first.
it's really more
concern.
a town ask.
It is a town ask.
Well, requirement. Did
It's
I
a
hear you correctly? A
requirement.
requirement, not an ask.
It
How
is.
many towns are requiring it?
Which ones?
Which one?
Well, hopefully I don't get it wrong, because I'm sure I'll hear about it, but I think it's Apex and Fuquay-Varina, maybe.
So the question would be, if we.
I'm sorry if I got that wrong.
If we build a school in that municipality, then we'd have to build the charging stations. Okay.
Right.
It's interesting, years ago, LEED, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, but LEED was a thing that we would go after, many school districts did. That's an expensive proposition to go after LEED and to get that plaque to hang on the wall. And so we do a lot of LEED stuff, we just don't go after the accolades that go with it. But charging stations have been around for a long time. We're going to visit a school soon in Rocky Mount that has some, that I worked on years ago, that has a charging station. We did it back in 2012. But they had some of the same concerns that we're talking about right now, people coming in after hours to use it, or the public coming in during the day. And so consequently, they limited the use to just school staff. I don't know what they're doing now, but back then, that's how it was proposed. But that's a school that we're going to look at that was completed some time ago. It has some different systems in it, and now that they've been in place for 10 or 11 years, we want to go and see how things are operating.
Doug, can you have a follow-up?
I do, I have a couple things.
Go ahead.
Okay.
So circling back to the definition, I think the first people we need to have that definition conversation with is the commissioners. Because if they have their own goal for county government, I mean, they build our buildings, right? I think we should work with them on defining it, because those things, those definitions should, if not be the same, complement each other. So that's the first conversation I would have as far as defining what we mean in WCPSS when we say sustainability. Back to the EV stations, this is a down the road, just a comment. If the intent of the municipalities is to help build up the network, I believe we should support that. And I do appreciate the security concerns, but it doesn't have to be an all or nothing. They could be open to the public on the weekends, and we can have those discussions later with our security department, but I don't think it's a bad thing that they're requiring it, and they're not going away, and whether or not students have these vehicles, our buildings are public buildings, and there's got to be some way to support that intent of building up the network. So,
Okay. Going back, Ms. Caulfield, did you have more?
Well, I was actually going to raise the safety issue, but I guess you kind of talked about it. I was just going to ask, I have a couple of them, but the Bermuda grass, I saw that listed in there. Is there ever been talk of maybe long-term turf? I know that there are some soccer fields that have that. Is that more of an expense than doing something like Bermuda? Because I know with like track, and you have lacrosse, you have soccer, running on it. Bermuda still needs a lot of maintenance, regardless. Does that save in the long run or not? I see him laughing.
So, turf is great, okay. The maintenance is nothing, although you do have to sweep it, and so, turf is great. You can get a lot of play on the surface. Yeah, and there are some definite places where we could use a turf field, where we have some limited space for outdoor activities. We could certainly do that. We actually have some turf at West Millbrook Middle. It's about half the size of this room, but it is out there and it looks good. For me, from where I sit, and others too, and I'm sure Nate would echo this, if we're going to go that route, particularly at high-use areas such as football stadiums, which is great, we have to also think about the replacement cost, because a new field going in, maybe 1.3 million, okay, and then some amount lesser than that at some point in time, 10 years down the road, when it needs to be replaced. So I've talked to Darren Coe about this many times. He loves turf too. He wishes we could turf everything. And in terms of the maintenance aspect of it, it's great, and the playability is great, but we've got to think about not only that first cost, but down the road, how are we going to pay for that replacement cost? And so some of the things that we've talked through, there is another project or two where we're discussing turf right now. We could accrue some money from rental of the fields out to various groups. Now, would that generate enough to cover the cost of the replacement field? Probably not, but it could put a dent into it. So I do think there are areas where turf could really be to our advantage. We've just not gone down that road. There's a first cost, and then there's that replacement cost that is really high.
So you're looking at like an estimate of 1.3 million, you said, and 10-year span.
So the 1.3 would be roughly the initial cost, and it could be, and again, I don't know what the current numbers are. We talked in the last 6 months about some stuff. So, and again, depending on the type of field you put in and what you're actually putting the turf on. So they're just some ballpark numbers.
So we might be able to, not all or nothing, maybe do all of our playgrounds in that, some certain, like maybe your track fields, because they don't require as much.
I mean, football fields?
Yeah,
Or
football isn't really track, yeah.
So we could, again, that's a budget item that we haven't contemplated. So in thinking of we can only spend the dollar one time, what do we not do in order to do those turf fields? There's a trade-off. But again, there are some areas where we could probably use a turf field, and it would be a good plan.
Do you have something on the turf field?
Yes.
Okay, Dr. Ing.
Yeah, we were talking about like this unintended consequences, right? There's a theme. With using turf, is there any issue with increasing water runoff as a result of using that kind of, is it considered an impervious surface? And is that going to have an impact on increasing water runoff and all that kind of stuff? So
I think the answer is yes and yes. It does depend on the jurisdiction. I think most jurisdictions would consider that impervious.
So then you'd have to look at, does your building site now have all of the required stormwater mitigation, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And then what do you have to put on, what square footage of the property do you have to dedicate now to retention ponds or whatever else you might have? So, and then, I hate to be the lawyer in the room, but we know from professional sports how many injuries we see on turf fields. And generally, you prevent these through better maintenance, but we know what our maintenance challenges are already. And if we're having a difficulty maintaining, HVAC systems and potentially heating systems as we move into the winter, are we going to be able to guarantee that we can maintain turf fields in good shape so that they don't contribute to injury? And then if you've got limited dollars, do you want to prioritize maintaining the turf field over your HVAC system, right? So I'm not saying we can't do it, but I'm just saying, like we've talked about, there's pros and cons with all of these that we have to weigh, and that's what kind of like a systematic approach, right? Looking at the, what did we say? I want to make sure I use it. The operational efficiency, the fiscal responsibility, and sustainability together, I think is a good way to view it, so we don't have unintended consequences just because we're trying to like check off a box. Sam?
Unless there's something I don't know, my experience on turf is that, and grass fields, is that the turf is maintained, it's much easier to maintain. And some of our fields now, at Carroll Middle School, for instance, that field becomes a disaster after like 3 months of the school year. And it's because, I-9 Sports is on it, and it is just rough. And I have been on it, I've officiated on it. When I've gone to Johnston County and been on their turf fields, or at Colonel Gibbons, they're always fine. And to the point about turf, when you get to the schools that have multiple fields for practice, those fields stay in great shape. I've never been on a Wake County Public School field that was at a high school level that was in poor shape when they've had multiple fields. But Mark knows that I am in favor of a few places, and I won't get into those now, for having turf. I did have one quick question, though, about the EV stations. Are they saying, like, we would we get any money out of that?
So, I can jump in there after speaking with you municipalities.
Okay.
I'm sorry. So the municipalities are requiring X number of stations per parking space that you have. How you operate them is up to you. So they want it to be there. So whether we decide as an organization that we are going to charge staff to park there and charge, or there's a whole user end of EV stations, which is not the capital investment, which becomes the operational part.
Right.
What do we choose as an organization to do? Do we leave them on the weekends? Do we turn them off after hours? It's all software, and it comes down to what you agree to do with your provider. So there are many companies on state contract that we're going to engage with to procure and maintain the equipment. And then we have to decide, is there a mechanism, are we going to give that power away to staff if they park there during the day? Are we going to charge everyone to use those stations during the day? Are we going to leave them on? Are we going to turn them off? So there are options. But right now, as far as the capital side of things, we're just required to have them in those municipalities.
The only reason I asked is because we're going to have a empty middle school, right, in one of those towns soon, and we can just lease out if they want to put in a bunch of EV stations, and we try to figure out what to do. We can make some money.
All right, so if you remember at the beginning of the discussion, I said what we wanted to avoid was a very piecemeal,
It was just
project by
came up, it was
project
kind of funny.
approach, right? And I certainly know where you're coming from with that reference. One of the things that Mark and I have shared back and forth have been, some of the stories of the work that we already do towards sustainability that a lot of our design team very intentionally incorporates into the design. And so, Conn Elementary School, is one of our magnet schools, had a recent renovation. And just the list of all of the things the design team was able to incorporate into the project, I think, deserves to be mentioned. Things like sun shading, to reduce mechanical loads, by keeping the school cooler simply by building more shade around it or planting shade trees around it, you can reduce the energy needed to cool the school. We've talked about how broad a definition of sustainability. One of the things we just voted on our consent agenda was, and they've worked this into Con as well, is where you have walkable connections for walkers and bikers, so that people don't always have to drive into the school, right? You know, you're promoting, you know, less, you know, traffic on the road, and you also get the benefit of a healthy lifestyle. You know, at Con, they use more local materials to reduce gas and emissions for transportation. They use materials that have inherent thermal properties like brick or concrete, right, that can absorb the sun's heat during the day, so that in the wintertime you don't have to use as much fuel to keep the building warm. Solar orientation, how you lay out the building, what direction you place the windows can assist you with the lighting needed, and again, with your heating and cooling. Cool and reflective roofs can reflect the heat back. Again, we talked about like what you could do to make up more carbon neutral kitchens by switching over to electric. You can do that with all of your Energy Star appliances to reduce energy consumption. It's at Con, they use formaldehyde-free and low VOC materials to reduce off-gassing, as we talk about like other environmental aspects, right? What is the air quality in the school? Is it a safe, healthy environment? Ultra-low flow plumbing fixtures to reduce water usage. Again, there's a real, you know, financial benefit to reducing your water costs. Continuous air barrier insulation at exterior walls for enhanced building performance. We all know the stories about insulation and keeping the air you want inside. More reliance on LEDs for more fuel efficiency. You know, bottle filling stations to reduce reliance on just plastic bottles. Yeah, it just goes on and on. I'm not going to read the whole brochure, but we already have a lot of sustainable practices. But rather than us at the board table coming back and saying, you know what, we need more bottle fillers, or we need to use more native plant material, or things like this, I think if we could provide the direction that we need the district to develop a sustainability definition. Again, it sounds like from board comment, we want to work hand in hand with the county on this. I would say, though, if the county is only looking at carbon neutrality or only looking at solar, that we can offer some leadership and try to present maybe a broader picture, right? Especially if there's cost savings and, you know, more return on our investment involved. But let's come up with a mutual definition. And then let's start, once we have that definition, start to look at what we do, what we can measure and capture, and then we can come back and have staff present. These are some areas where we think we can make some real improvements that will promote sustainability and also promote the health of the school district. And then we can look for a plan that has an assessment, and then setting new targets and seeing where we can move. I think we all want the district to save money. We want the district to operate efficiently, but we also want it to be a clean and a safe and a healthy environment. And if we can do that, and then we can have additional practices that are going to be good for our community, reduce air pollution in the community, improve community health in the community, not overtax our landfills. These are all additional benefits that we can realize with these practices. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I know all the answers. I just know that in my work in the county, what I don't want us to do is convene a bunch of focus groups, generate a binder of topics, and then set that binder on a shelf somewhere, right? One of the things about having this in the strategic plan is to incorporate a level of accountability for it. That this is important, that the board has said this is something that we want the district to pursue. And then we can provide as much direction as needed, but we're also going to trust you all's expertise and guidance to figuring out how we can make that possible.
Two things. I think it's worthwhile to know, and I did give you your original
Yes.
back. He lent it to me months ago, and I finally returned it. The things he mentioned, this is a way of life. We do these now. So these are things that, by and large, are incorporated into what we do. We already have, at least for us, a vehicle in place to have these conversations with the county. It's our core team. And so we've got a meeting next week. So we will, and we've had some of these conversations with them, but we'll take this opportunity to maybe pull and get some information from them. They can talk to their staff on their side and come together, and we can report back the progress that we make on that.
So as we roll into new business, one of the things to talk about is going to be our next steps. And so I'll come back to you in just a minute. And so I think, after you've had a chance to go and talk to the county about some of our discussions today, if you could bring back some more thoughts about that definition and what you think those next steps could be. I think another future meeting, if we could highlight some of the work, some more of the work that we are doing around the district, and even if we have people from some of the schools that have really pioneered some practices we might want to look at. We might be able to have some guest speakers come in, like if we have students that have come in student achievement to talk about different programs, then we could certainly have some representatives from some schools that have really incorporated some practices that we might want to model, that could come in and present. And then that way we can keep this discussion going throughout the year, and I really think continue on a very structured path, not doing it very scattershot, right? Not just bringing individual projects, but being very intentional about coming up with a definition, coming up with goals, and then working toward meeting those goals. Sam?
I just want to add that I think it's important as we discuss this to tie in educational angles to this in our school system. What are we teaching around this in our schools? How can this be translated into it, into academics? And I understand this is a facilities committee meeting, but there is a lot of potential there, and there are a lot of jobs related to this kind of work. So is there, and I know we do teach some things at some schools, but I would love a conversation around this, and as we go down this path, how do we incorporate academics and that sort of work, since that is our main mission.
And I actually wrote that down as one of the things to focus on. I put part of standards, because there's nothing that says as a school district we can't have local standards that we want taught. And so that's certainly where the curriculum department can get involved and develop some. We can determine where we want those taught. They could be K-12 or a particular area. I would certainly think a K-12 standard, because what you talk about in kindergarten should be certainly different than what you talk about on the way out in 12th grade, but great point.
And just as one quick follow-up, on that note, we had a student at Cary High School who did a big research project. I think she's going to be a senior. I think she's a senior now. Her name is Zoe Williams. She's at Cary High School, and she did a research project on how much education is going into our schools. Do we talk about climate change? And we really don't talk about those things. And I'll forward you, Dr. Taylor, an email from her, because that was in the end of the last school year. But she did a lot of research on it. I think it was a great representation of a student in our school system, but on that topic.
Dr. Ed?
Yeah, just kind of piggybacking from the both of you guys. In terms of like education, I mean, even understanding where our electricity comes from, I personally want to know, is it coming from the nuclear power plant mostly, or somewhere else, because I mean, certainly relying on electricity is better than using fossil fuel, but where is that electricity coming from? If it's nuclear power plant, then yeah, great, it's clean energy, right? And then secondly, do we have any other counties or school systems that we can model from, or find who are maybe like 20 years ahead or 15 years ahead that we can?
My response would be, we're not far behind, so they're not in front of us. What I would initially say is that I think there are, instead of whole district initiatives throughout the state, there are individual schools that are being built. We visited one last fall, and I mentioned to you all, it was a net positive school, where the school produced more electricity than it used. They still had a power bill for other reasons, but so not really districts. We can look into that more. I'm not familiar with anybody. Dave, do you know of anybody that's doing a lot more?
We did. We reached out to quite a few districts nationally and saw some really good examples. Now, each state has different things set up. So some were benefiting, you know,
Yeah.
from how their states had things set up. School district in Maryland, you know, was very impressive. But a lot of their funding structure was not the same as ours.
Yeah, certainly, you know, I'd like to know if there's a way we can kind of follow some other people's models, or at least just to kind of avoid any pitfalls that they may have already experienced, you know, so that we don't fall into those again, you know, as well. So just some ideas to throw at you guys.
Yeah, and we did, I think it was Montgomery County, Maryland, and we did get some good feedback. They said, stay away from vegetated roofs or particular plants, you know, because they had a maintenance problem with it. It was like, well, good advice, you know. So it was interesting. It was kind of funny, so.
Yeah, that used to be a thing.
Yeah.
Well, and it still is. I was in Chicago and Washington DC, and you see a lot of buildings, you know, with vegetated roofs. And they look very nice and attractive, and they serve a purpose. I think their message was be specific about what you put on that roof. And that point is well taken.
So Dr. Ng, what I can do is actually lift that question up to districts in the state. I think it's like Guy said, most people are going to have individual projects that they do. I can't think of any larger effort that a district is making. It's just individual stuff. But I know there's a lot we've learned about the cost of creating zero net energy buildings. The cost to construct it is much higher. And I can tell you that I met with an architect that talked about the cost savings that you have over time. But I knew a little something about numbers, and I don't want to say they were inflated, but that's part of the trade-off that you talk about. And so I'll lift that question up and see if there's any specific thing that a district is doing in North Carolina. And then we can certainly look at other places across the country that are working on this. We can share that.
Ms. Caulfield, did you have another question
Yeah,
or comment?
I guess more a comment. Consistency is something that we talk about often in a lot of our different committee meetings with, we're trying to make adjustments, you know, because we do have 200 schools. We are huge in trying to get that to go together. The academics is one thing that I wanted to ask about, because if we have programs in all of the schools, like Conn Elementary, it's great. Everything they had there was wonderful that you were listing off. But with 200 schools, what's the percentage of schools that we have if we only have this in one school, that in 5 schools? Like, if we had more of a consistent thing, I don't want to say it's definitely like part of our curriculum, but maybe it is, you know, because it is. If you think about it, you know, knowledge is power, and that's what we're giving to our children. So if we educate them, they get involved, they get their families involved, they get their community involved, and that umbrella just gets so much bigger. And the impact in the end is so much bigger. So having that more in the classroom, getting the kids involved, maybe some scholarship opportunities where we have, you know, I'd say about competitions or plaques or things that we hand out for people or for certain schools, that they all kind of work towards something. And in the end, it's, yeah, you get a prize and you get a big certificate, that's great, but you also get that learning experience as you're going along. And it gives you that drive to try and figure out some creative ways, things that you're doing, like the rain barrels and making your own gardens. We've talked about the Every Trade Counts program that we did, the pilot they had there. Just different ways to like recycle water and how they can do it at their school and then take it into their community. And I think it's not, anything that we're talking about today is not really a one and all. There is no one solution. There's no 5 solutions. It's just a matter of putting it all together. But having consistency somewhere along the line, I think, would be much more of an impact than just 1 or 2 things that we're sitting here talking about. So just kind of like a comment about, I'd love to see it more in the kids' hands and the families' hands, because that really does make more of an impact.
I think we can look district-wide, and we'll see like a lot of good work in individual schools. We talk about the academic piece. I know like Mills Park Middle School just did it's something, again, through the standards, right? They've looked at the standards for their science classes, and I think it's maybe the 7th graders will come out and they will have a conservation fair. And a lot of them put together, and I shared the winners of Mark, you know, conservation ideas for how they could improve like energy efficiency or waste reduction at their schools. And a lot of our schools could do that, right? But right now it's just sort of like a one-off. Or at Con specifically, you know, we talk about learning experience. If you have solar, if you have something like this, what they've done is they've just opened up, instead of that dusty, dark maintenance room, there's a big picture window with plaques and things that explain exactly what's going on so students can see it. And that's more, you can turn it, you know, you can, I guess, give it a dual purpose. It is systems and operations, but then it's also a learning lab, right? So I think that there's a lot of good things being done, but structurally, if we can try to, what would you say?
I would love
Like
for it to go
aggregate
in-
it and be in like
Right.
one district.
Exactly. I
Yeah.
would love for it to go at Con Elementary, we do this, too, at Wake County, we do this.
Yeah.
That's more.
I get it. I think that's a good point. All right, well, we've fulfilled my objective of having a robust discussion. I would like to get on the calendar for a future meeting, coming back and letting us know how your discussions with the county have gone, and if there is more work around a definition that we can do. And then again, I would like, as we try to develop more of a countywide or district-wide approach, it would be great, I think, to take some time to hear from some schools about some pilots that they've done and really talk about pros and cons and lessons learned, right? Like you said, there's been some that someone had a good idea and maybe it didn't work out so well. And there's been others that maybe, hey, this is something maybe all schools should do. And sort of, really going through that, I think could be really informative. And for which one? Oh, the values meeting. Do we have, I know you said, I think first quarter, do you have a date for this values meeting?
We don't yet.
Okay, it's still in the planning stages? Okay. All right, well, unfortunately, I have timed out. Is there any more discussion on sustainability at this time? All right, if not, we'll go to what I think is the next item on the agenda by memory, which is just new business. We've talked about new business related to sustainability. Did anybody else have any other issues that they wanted to bring up that you'd like to see addressed at a future committee meeting?
Turf fields.
There you go.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear. I'm sorry.
All right. We will continue to talk about, at some point, athletic facilities do deserve a discussion because we do get a lot of questions about those. But if anyone else has anything, ideas, then we'll go to our 3-month forecast. Dave?
Sure, and I will be brief, because I know we have another meeting coming up. If there's any questions, certainly would try to answer them or get you an answer in the future. I would show that in December, we're bringing some security design contracts to the board, and that'll be a great step there. And in January, some of the projects that I mentioned in the sustainability slides are coming up with the CM at risk contractors for those contracts. So those are kind of the highlights.
All right. Perfect. All right, if there are no questions about the forecast, all right, then at that point, I will entertain a motion for us to adjourn. We don't really need one, but,
So moved.
all right, Mr. Hershey.
Second.
Second, and acknowledged by both Ms. Evans and Dr. Ing. And we will call it a little bit early and give you all a little bit of time before the public hearing. Again, public hearing is on reassignment, the next draft of the reassignment plan. I hope you can stick around for it. Thanks a lot, everybody.
I'll be here.